Open heart, open mind, welcome to the Sadhva channel. Namaste to all Dharma friends all over the world. My name is Shravon. I'm the co-founder of the Sadhva project.
Myself Samiksha Mishram and I am from the Sattva Youth. Bringing Dharma to you and represent Dharma with Youth. Sattva Youth is a Buddhist youth program initiated by the Sattva project.
Welcome everybody. And before we begin our tonight's program, let us express our gratitude to our StreamYard sponsor and media partner, Durian ASEAN and Durian FN. Not to forget also a very important person behind the scene, our broadcast director, Brother Chong. Brother Chong, would you like to say hi to everyone?
Hi everyone, very good evening and welcome to our show today, part 3 already of this very interesting topic. Please do like and share so that more people can benefit, and for those watching on YouTube, please also like, share and subscribe. And now back to you guys.
Thanks, Brother Chong. Okay, today we are going to start a very interesting series by the name of Noble Tara series, which is part 5 of the series. And today entitled Women, Buddhism and Psychology, part 3. So let's look at the speakers and the moderator for today. So first of all, I would like to introduce you to moderator for today, Sister Smitha Lahiri. Having spent over 20 years in the technology industry, Smitha decided to give it up and dedicate more time to her Dharma journey. After finding some precious teachers and attending several retreats, she decided to undertake structured study of the Dharma, and she recently graduated with a diploma in Buddhist philosophy from Nalanda tradition from Tibet House, Delhi. She is currently on the board of Tashi Gesser Buddhist Center in Maine and works closely with Venerable Dasel. During her corporate tenure, she was on the advisory board for the Grace Hopper Conference for Women in Technology and worked passionately for the cause. She was a counselor for cancer patients and their caregivers, something that helped her immensely in her Dharma practice. Smita is based in Bangalore, India. Welcome, Sister Smita.
Hi, thank you, Sharabla. Thank you, Samisha, for having me over. And I hope we
Welcome.
have a very thought-provoking conversation today. Looking
Thanks,
forward
Smita.
to tonight's discussion.
Yes. And our next contributor will be Venerable Tenzin Dasel. Venerable Tenzin Dasel is a teacher and leader who has been practicing Buddhism and meditation for over 2 decades. She is the founder of Main Mindfulness Project and served as the Buddhist spiritual advisor at BITS College and the spiritual program coordinator at Tashi Gaseling Buddhist Center. She holds many honors and distinctions for her work with women, children, and young and youth throughout the US, India, and the world. Welcome, Venerable Tenzin Dasel.
Yes, hello everybody, wherever you're tuning in from, and wish you a very lovely moment here if you're joining us live, and very happy to be part of this very important topic that we're going to address and continue to look at. Looking forward to any contributions, questions from anyone who's listening, and greet all of my very distinguished panel members as well as the Satyat crew behind the scenes putting all this format together for us. We really appreciate your efforts. So thank you so
Thank you.
much for having me.
Our next contributor is Sister Tripti Lochan. Tripti Lochan is the Global Capability Development Officer of VMLY&R, a global brand and customer experience agency with over 12,800 employees and more than $2 billion in annual revenue. She is responsible for identifying areas for capability growth and developing strength globally in line with the company's vision. Tripti has been a part of VMLY and R's global leadership team for over a decade and partners with teams across all regions and sub-brands worldwide. Previous to this role, Tripti was the co-CEO Asia and managed diverse markets across Asia and was responsible for the strategy and growth of VMLY&R in Asia. Regularly sought for opinion on all matters marketing, Tripti judges award shows like the EFES and AMES, speaks at diverse conferences, including keynotes at Advertisement Technology and Forrester, and writes opinion pieces in Campaign Asia, Business Insider, and CMO.com. Tripti is a Buddhist, and her Dharma journey started with a Vipassana retreat that sparked her thirst to learn more about Buddhism in 2009. She has completed the Nalanda Diploma in Buddhist Psychology from Tibet House, taught by Geshe Dorje Damdullah, and is in the second year studying Logic of a 3-year logic and debate course taught by Atisha Mathur at ILTK Italy. She knows that these are the very first steps on our journey. We welcome you, Sister Tripti Lochan.
It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you for being here. Our next contributor is Dr. Lydia Brown. Dr. Lydia Brown is a clinical psychologist, resilience researcher, and mindfulness teacher. She holds academic positions at the University of Melbourne and La Trobe University and completed postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School. She is fascinated by how people can use mindfulness and compassion based techniques to cope up with life's challenges. Her research in this area has been covered in the media internationally, including the Chicago Tribune, the ABC, and Reduce Health. Prior to training to be psychologist, she spent many months living in a Buddhist monastery in the hills above Kandy, Sri Lanka, where she learned of Buddhist meditation. She draws on this personal training in meditation as well as her knowledge of the science to deliver workshops and public talks. As an international advisory board member to Headspace, one of the world's leading mindfulness meditation apps, she helps shape global trends in mindfulness and well-being practices. She shares their mission to improve the health and happiness of the world. It's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Lydia.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, a part of this conversation. Welcomed by the Sattva Project. So I very much appreciate the chance to be here today.
Yes.
So let the dialogue begin, Sister Smitha.
Thank you, Sharabla. Thank you, Samiksha, so much for the introductions. And good to see you all again, Venerable Dasel, Dr. Lydia, and Tripti ji. For those of you who are listening in for the first time, this is part of a series that we started 3 months back, titled "Psychology, Women Psychology and Buddhism." We try to investigate women, their psychology, their thinking, and tie in their pursuit of dharma. So also bring in aspects of women and Buddhism, and tie in the three aspects together. So we have a varied panel here. Venerable Dasel is, as you all know, is a nun in the Tibetan order. Dr. Lydia, and who's bringing in the perspective of a psychologist, and Tripti ji, who is a laywoman but bringing in the perspective of both a woman and the dharma aspect as well. So we have a wonderful panel, and today we begin on a very somber note. I mean, before we could just start this conversation, I guess we were all talking about the recent shooting incidents in the US. There was one in the school in Texas, and there was one in Chicago yesterday, I think, on the Memorial Day weekend. And prior to when I was thinking about this conversation itself, and Tripti ji actually brought it up in one of the first conversations, that uh, women actually, if a lot of leaders in the world were women, we wouldn't see as much violence. So I think, given the current context, I think that would be a great question to begin our discussion today. um, Violence is not commonly associated with women. And I just pulled up some statistics as well. And if you were to look at all the mass shootings in the US itself from 1982 till now, we see that less than 3% of the mass shootings are actually committed by women. I mean, so the numbers speak for themselves, right? So, his Holiness as well always says this, right? If women have the capacity to lead us, that they do have the capacity to lead us to a more peaceful world with compassion, affection, and kindness. So, I begin today's conversation with a question to Dr. Lydia. Can we make a generalization that women are more compassionate and less prone to violence? Or are these just stereotypes? What does psychology, Western psychology, have to say about this?
What a timely question. And to see the gender difference in mass shootings in the US is quite, quite powerful. I don't know if we can share that graph with our viewers today. I know that we, Smitha, you shared a graph with me of this. And when I saw visually the number of shootings, I'm not sure if it's possible to share with our listeners. But Smitha, can you remind me how many within that time frame were men versus women? It was
Yeah, I think 123 men and 3 women.
So 123 male perpetrators of mass shootings versus 3 females. That is a clear difference. It doesn't sound like a kind of, mild difference. That's a very, very substantial difference. And I think it's also helpful to note that, mass shootings of other people, but also self-harm, so suicide, males are 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide compared to women. So not only may they enact violence on others, but also on themselves. Interestingly, though, if you look at mental health and the global burden of mental health, women actually have, according to how we define mental illness, are sort of deemed more mentally ill than men in terms of years lived with disability from mental illness. So I find that quite strange that our world in psychology and in psychiatry, we say that women on average are, you could say, less mentally healthy than men. But then these acts of violence towards other people in terms of wars or mass shootings, or towards the self in terms of suicide, males dominate. And you think, well, that's strange. How could women be less mentally healthy than men if men are also then committing these very significant acts of violence? And I think maybe, I don't know the answer for that question, but mental illness is often defined by like internal symptoms of, say, concentration disturbance or anxiety, these sort of internalized emotional states or experiences that we can sort of have within ourselves, like concentration disturbance. And these internalizing aspects are more common with women, perhaps, whereas men are more likely to act. And this makes me think about the Eightfold Noble Path, where the Buddha talks about, the path towards, I guess, the ultimate mental health. Maybe you could say, use that terminology of enlightenment. What are the factors of that? And he'll talk about, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and then right thought. So I think that, mental training has these different aspects. We can train our actions to be pure or impure, and we can also train our mind to be pure or impure. And on the action level, I think the data seems to be quite clear that men are more violent. I think that that's not a debate. I think that there's a lot of data supporting that. Males may have a greater tendency towards violence, as far as I understand. And yet, wow, how can women be more mentally unwell? It doesn't really add up to me. I don't necessarily think women are more. I personally don't think women are necessarily more close to enlightenment, though, just because, or more mentally healthy, just because they're not violent. It's just that maybe our inclinations are a bit different, and our challenges that we have to work on are a little different. We might not need to work to overcome sort of physical anger, physical violence as much on average, but we might have, self-doubt or low confidence. And these things, even though they're internal, they can actually be very big barriers to not only mental health, but also spiritual development. And so, women maybe just have different things to work on compared to men. That was a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's so interesting to kind of think about these things. But not just interesting, so pertinent and so heartbreaking as well to hear about what happened in the US time and time again. It's just really heartbreaking, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that from the other speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smitha, could I
Thank you
add
so much.
something?
Yeah.
here? I was thinking about this a lot as well very recently, and I started looking at research about because you're right, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said that women are more compassionate, and then I started looking for research around it as well, and I'm not going to be able to quote specific research, not being a scientist like Dr. Lydia, but the general trend is that neuroscientists have difficulty in differentiating between this is a male brain and this is a female brain. And this is research that's happened out of the University of Berkeley. But there are differences that, no, and another one, there is no difference in compassionate instinct, theoretically. Okay, there is no difference in compassionate instinct. That was research done by Dr. Keltner, I think. But the big difference is the response to danger. Okay, so there is a very clear response to tension, stress, and danger. And this is research that was done at UCLA by Shelley Taylor, which says men go into fight or flight mode as a response, while as women go into tend and befriend. Right? So women's response to stressful situations is more likely to be around socializing, bonding with others, nurturing within a community, seeking protection. And the last part of this is the socialization that has happened from time immemorial for women. I was given dolls. My brother was given a truck, to play with. And he went zoom, zoom, on the floor, and it was rough. While I was feeding my baby doll and giving her milk and all of those things. So the socialization that has happened over these so many years has also changed our response, to situations. And maybe that leads to a more compassionate response to any situation. We get tears. And Venerable Dasel will talk more about how Tara was supposed to have been formed from one of the two tears of Avalokiteshvara. He's the god of compassion. I mean, it was theoretically a he, but Tara was one of the tears that came from his being. And to me, that was so telling. Not to distract from the question, but I think we are habituated to respond in a more compassionate way, even though men have equally a compassionate bone. And not only men, all sentient beings have compassion as an instinct, is what the research says.
Yes, can I add a little bit in here, Smitha? Is this a good chance?
Yes, absolutely.
So just so well articulated by Dr. Lydia Brown and by Tripti ji, that a couple of thoughts is, yes, my teacher, His Eminence Khenso Rinpoche, has often said to me, because he was one of the first Buddhist monks who came to the US in the 70s to finish his Geshe degree. And then he ended up staying quite a bit and teaching at different high institutions, Harvard, Smith, Bates, Bowdoin colleges, and traveled quite a bit in the country, and could really now for over 4 decades get a feel for the cultural difference between the East and the West. And he said to me one time, as Dr. Lydia said, really the only sane being is a Buddha, because a Buddha would have enlightened the mind all the way up to omniscience, to always act only with wisdom and compassion. So also mentioning the Eightfold Path, really right view is starting with the view of how things really exist. And in Buddhism, we can talk about emptiness and shunyata, but it's another way to say it is deep interdependence, deep connection. We say dependent arising. If this appears, then this will appear as well. And then the way they interact will then produce a kind of a result. So with thinking about the way as Tripti was talking about, just socialization for girls and boys, making a generalized statement now that in many, many cultures up until recently, choice wasn't really there in either direction. It was like if you were a boy, it was almost pre-programmed from generation to generation. If you're a boy, this means, yes, sons, guns, cars, sports. You're going out in the world to conquer it, to kind of control the physical world. If you're a girl, it means dolls, nurturing, frilliness, tea sets, very daintiness. And now this is in transformation, challenging those gender roles. But inherently, as human beings, between the psychology of then what does that look like as we grow, means also that the girls are being kind of intuitively, the research has shown that the female in any mammal species, so whether it's cats or dolphins or human beings, the female has a much heightened sense perception. And intuitively, the female is the mother. This is why we say in Buddhism, we care for all our mother sentient beings. We see every being, we don't think about gender, we just feel like we love them with altruistic compassion, the way a mother loves her only child. So we don't discriminate based on, it has to be my biological child or what gender or race or nationality. No, just the fact that it's alive, we nurture and take care of that being as precious. And so it seems women also have a much more natural, intuitive way to understand, like tend and befriend, not just from socializing, but just from the nature of gentleness. And my thoughts about why women are the least likely to be the perpetrators and the most likely to be the victims is that when a dangerous situation arises, the women will be the first ones to go in and try to settle it down. Whether it's a teacher, someone mentioned the shooting in the schools in Texas this a few days ago, and one of the teachers literally was shot while she was embracing her student, using her body to shield the student. And she lost her life. I don't know, but I think the student lived, actually. Don't quote me on that, but the point is she was able to see that danger and jump in and without thought, just give herself that way. And then now what does she also become? She's a heroine for sure. She's a great sattva in my book. I don't care if she ever heard the word Buddhism, but that's how a bodhisattva acts. And she was doing what her intuition, she wouldn't have had even a moment to think about it intellectually. She just acted from a place of love and protection. And that, of course, if you're in a society, like I'm American here in the US, I was just mentioning now the number one cause of death for our children and teenagers is gun violence. And this has to change, this violent culture, because it's crazy making. This is why my thoughts are, this is why women, as Dr. Lydia was talking about, tend to have much more neuroses, because you don't have to be in the presence of the violence to feel that undercurrent of uncertainty and anger, and where everyone's carrying guns, not knowing what's going to come up. And for teachers who read about this day in and day out across the nation's schools, imagine being a teacher in the US, going into school thinking, is today going to be the day? I was a teacher before I became a gymnastic, and also had that experience of a young seventh grader, making plans, drawing bomb plans. In my mind, I always put him in the front of the class because I knew he was troubled and he needed more love. And so I wanted to keep him closer to me. I always brought the students that had harder times focusing, who were distracted and distracting. They were actually 100% boys. close to me so that I could watch them and help them stay on focus. But for women who are sensing this, that internalizing of that emotional uncertainty and fear obviously can lead to deep anxiety disorders, depression, if we're talking about the mental health aspect. And the socialization for the male, not having the freedom to express through words, express the emotion, show the emotion, emote, means bottled up rage, and then you give guns to that person who's been socialized, and what happens is that expresses through blind ignorance. All anger is really, all violence is blind ignorance. Of the three poisons in Buddhism, the first is the ignorance, and anything that's going to be acting out of ignorance. And ignorance means the true nature of reality that is based on deep interconnection and deep, deep loving kindness and compassion. Our real essence is wonderfulness, is amazing interconnection, and part of the beauty, part of this incredible life system that has order in it, that has expression around wonder and nature of growth and seeds. And if you nurture a flower seed, eventually a shoot will come, and then eventually blossoms will come. And it's fantastic what nurturing can do. And now is a moment in time that we need to create a movement, not just in the United States, but worldwide, calling for sanity, because what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia is the same expression of this. It's aggression, misplaced. Nobody wins in that kind of a situation, not individually, whether it's a boy with a gun, and not collectively where it's, mostly men with guns. Now women are also, of course, in the armies and taking up weapons. So this is not the right direction. The right direction is, let's understand the sanity, why our practice of Buddhism, and especially in Vajrayana, is based on reason and logic, is because we can learn new emotions. We're equipped to do this. We come in with the capacity for love and kindness. We come in with the capacity to understand anger can't really be our friend, so we need to understand anger and then understand what's the antidote to anger. It certainly isn't violence. The antidote to anger is reason. Understand what is coming up for your own mind, and then attend to that with awareness, compassion, and loving kindness, knowing, wow, anger doesn't feel good. And if it doesn't feel good for me, I'm not going to share it out with all the people around me. I'm going to learn wisdom and compassion through understanding the emotions. And this we can teach, this we can all do, but we need a whole different framework of how we want to move forward into this 21st century. And we can do it. I'm sure of this. We will do it. There's a big movement now because of these eruptions showing us this is the time. And I'm absolutely sure women are going to lead the way, because more and more women around the planet right now are educated, understanding, in good positions of authority, of educating, of healers, and of spiritual leaders and politicians. We mentioned in another episode, through COVID, the countries that had the most effective response, meaning lowest epidemic spread, were led by women. So this is the moment to have these deep conversations, not only for the women to come forward and share, but because men need to learn this too, and men can learn this. I mean, anyone knows who's heard His Holiness giggling and laughing how tender his essence is. And my own teacher, His Holiness, His Eminence Khenzo Rinpoche, Geshe Dorje Damdula, so beautiful, kind. These qualities have nothing to do with being an embodied gender of a male or a female. This is a much deeper heart quality, that the heart is joining with the head, and together that reason and logic shows us, wonderful, create a happier world. Please do it right now. This is the call, this is the cry of the whole planet right now to us to respond to.
Thank you so much, all of you. I mean, it was very interesting, Dr. Lydia. I mean, I've had multiple conversations on the shootings, and um, I didn't have this piece of data when I had my conversations, that women actually have more mental health issues. So where is that correlation? And now you explained it really well, that women tend to look inwards. They tend to look inwards, internalize, whereas men are more likely to act. And tying in there was also Triptiji bringing in the fact that neuroscientists are actually saying there's no difference, fundamental difference in the brains of the men and women, but how we respond either through fight or flight, or women who are kind of socialized to tend and respond. Now, um, is that a bad thing that women have been socialized this way? I mean, I just want to play devil's advocate, because you see a lot of activism, a lot of movement around, women need to get into the army too. They should have the opportunities to play an equal role in every aspect of the world, and rightfully so. But do you see that things could go wrong if now women are to take on these violent roles as well, or being a part of the army? Um, I mean, I'll leave that open to any one of you.
I think that Tenzin Befriend is a beautiful and very powerful movement or motivation, and there's nothing bad about that. And I think that this Tenzin Befriend superpower that many women have, and on average, and I'm so pleased Tripti raised this, because it is something that women can really excel at, is connection, the capacity to connect. And I think that often these acts of violence come from the opposite of that. They come from a place of isolation or loneliness, or feeling quite disconnected from those around them in whatever way, be it you're at the bottom of the social hierarchy and it's a very lonely place, and so from that loneliness, isolation, you commit acts of violence, or even at the top, if you are, a dictator, but it's very lonely up there because you sort of set yourself above everybody else, and that's not really in line with how the world, how I guess a Buddhist framework of the world works. So you're right up there at the top, you're all alone, and that can kind of, I think, drive people to violence as well. So if we can learn, if maybe some men or world powers can sort of learn from this more feminine tendency towards tend and befriend, there's no downside to that. But I guess, like any superpower, sometimes they need a bit of fine tuning, or you need to just crystallize it or make it a little stronger, because at its worst, tend and befriending can be a bit like bitchiness, is what we'd say in Australia. It's about social networking and connecting, but women can start to be a bit toxic through not so much actions, well, maybe actions, but not so much physical violence, but more emotional, or words, hurtful words, bullying, and that type of thing. So even if we have this great strength for connection, we still have to be wary of the possible near enemy, I guess, of that, and actually work within ourselves to notice, especially when women are working together, be it for a Dharma organization, in a workplace, how am I relating to other women? How am I relating to this organization as a whole? And is there anything toxic about it? And if there is, how can I really work within myself and work as a group to kind of purify that? So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but yeah, but nothing wrong with tend and befriend.
Smitha,
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just to add another perspective, right? I 100% agree with what Dr. Lydia is saying, and every profession is open to everybody. From where I'm sitting, we should have women in the army. Why not? We should have women police force. Historically, the measures that we're taking. Do I take the action or do I not? On the week captured the enemy's soldiers, do you need to torture them? Or do you need to give them the grace and compassion of people who have been captured? And that's a judgment call at the time, on the space. I'm sure there are lots and lots of standard operating procedures that have been written for this, etc., etc. But it's a judgment call. I think, in fact, having women in those roles may, I can't say for a fact, but I think from what I know about women, and they would influence that in a positive way and say, hey, hang on a minute. Do we need to take off his toes, to be brutal? Maybe judgment of that level where you need to be a human being, not a thing that doesn't have the immediacy of the current situation in mind. May that change.
Yes, and to ground it in Buddhist perspective, I mean, what we're really talking about, again, it kind of transcends even the human being who's in any role, whether it's the teacher or the soldier, or the leader. It really needs to be an institutional change. It needs to go back to Smita's original question around, women taking up guns. Will it become then that the societies will become more violent? Well, there is a chance for that. But there's also a chance for what Tripti was saying, was that having a woman in a role in the right moment could be helpful. But if you just keep depending on it being a gender or a certain situation, you're never going to get that transformational shift away from the violence. And so what we really want is to shift our mindset away from the violence. We really need to shift and refocus on the compassion and the sanity and reasons. We can base our reasons in logic and proof for why compassion is much more sane and a much more immediate solution to any conflict, through dialogue, through compassionate listening, through deep listening, through exchange. I mean, really, the Buddha himself said, out of all of my qualities, speech is the most important. Why? Because you have to be clear to connect and to make speech understood, and to have it land has to be deeply listened to. So in certain ways, we need to learn how to listen more deeply in order to learn more properly what is effective, what is logical based on reason, that leads not just to individual happiness, but to the collective happiness. And this is talking now about transforming the pure motivation of the institutions themselves, whether it's the military, whether it's education systems, whether it's the politic, that it means the people being educated to become leaders within those institutions deeply understand, not that they have to be Buddhist, not at all, but they understand through reason, through a very secular approach, and the very psychological approach, that grounding decision-making in reason, showing cause and effect and then positive outcome, that is the win-win for the individual as well as for the situation, the collective, it's just rational. I mean, it's just something that can be set up for everybody to learn. And you don't have to brainwash anybody, because they can use they're encouraged. They have to use their own experience. It has to be experiential learning to show that, yes, actually this, in my own experience, using this practice brings me more happiness. It brings more peace of mind, and it's transformative immediately. It immediately brings a solution through some effort. Of course, it takes time, but time we have. Time it takes to learn, we have. Impulsiveness is what creates the violence. Impulsiveness give someone a gun. A gun is an impulsive machine. It's only created for one thing. It's only created to kill. The gun has no mind behind itself. The gun only has the human emotion, the human mind, the human intention. So taking that out of the equation and instead putting in the hand of reason, the hand of looking deeply, the hand of investigation, and then the experience coming out of that with a heart of compassion, learning quickly that transformative positive effect comes through this kind of inquiry, not through, yes, okay, everyone has freedoms to follow the life path that they want to, but let's create more life paths based on wisdom and compassion. That's really, that's going to be so inherently important for the whole planet.
Thank you so much, Venerable. Dr. Lydia, I'll come back to you on that. I'll just come back to you on the toxic part of tend and befriend in a bit. But before we get there, just wanted to quickly follow up on Triptiji's and Dasella's comments on how women can bring compassion to all the roles they are in, right? And they can bring about that change. Uh, but I just want to take a step back and see that all these mass shooters, right? All of these shooters had a woman in in their life. I mean, most of them would have had a mother or a sister, and even today, as we speak, every family has a woman in society, right? Well, what then is going wrong? I mean, why isn't the woman being able to make the change in the society today? I mean, as we see it today, we have women who are so compassionate. We have women who would not get violent very easily. But then, what is it that is going wrong today? Right? They not able to influence their families? Where is it? That there is a gap, and that maybe we can help make a change and bring a change in society. If you want to start with that, Dr. Lydia.
Oh, well, if I think about the mass shooters, the over 100 male mass shooters, yes, they would all have women in their life. They were all born from a mother. But I wonder if we knew their stories and we knew their histories, I would almost put money on the fact that they probably all have very significant trauma in their background as well. And so I spoke before about how isolation or loneliness or feeling on the fringes of society can lead to violence. But maybe that in and of itself isn't enough. That when combined with trauma of seeing substance abuse, or, I mean, so many traumas in the world, so much suffering. These things together, the causes and conditions can then lead to violence. And, you know, they're big things to change. Even if you have a mother, perhaps that mother had a drug addiction. And why did she have that? Because of her own trauma. There's a lot of trauma in the world. So why women haven't already impacted the world. Also, though, I think that's sort of on a grassroots level, but I think our power structures are dominated by men. And I do think that the more female perspectives infiltrate power structures, not by becoming more like a man and by feeling, right, I've got to just toughen up and I've got to be more aggressive and but ideally, in my opinion, if we can really own our feminine qualities and utilize them to their strength. I think I just came home from New Zealand today, and the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, she is a wonderful leader who, after a mass shooting in New Zealand that was done a few years ago, not long ago, there was a mass shooting, and the weapon was like a semi-automatic rifle. And just after that shooting happened, she had all these wonderful ideas, like, let's not name the shooter because that will give him fame, and that's exactly what he wants. So we will keep him unnamed. And then another key thing that they did in New Zealand was have a buyback scheme for any owners of semi-automatic rifles. They were now illegal. Owners would be forced to sort of give up their weapons in exchange for payment of, the cost. And that's a massive policy change in response to these violence. And I think that women in positions of power, like the example of New Zealand, this is where we can really see change at the higher level. And where I think we can also, sort of connect with the grassroots level. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of causes and conditions leading to violence, but, these two things can sort of work synchronistically and synergistically to lead to positive change.
Yeah, great.
Thank you
Great
so much, Lydia.
examples,
Yeah.
Dr. Lydia, because, when you're talking about those polarizations, that's exactly what happened in Texas. This teenage boy whose mother had problems, was being raised by his grandmother. And in fact, before he left into the shooting at the school, he shot his own grandmother in the face. And so his backstory is that he was very isolated, very polarized, and so he went to the authority that he perceived was going to prevent him from doing, I think he wasn't going to graduate from high school. So he went to a school, in his mind, perceiving that's preventing him from doing what he wants, and took out that anger. So you have this kind of feeling of the tension with the polarity of down here alone, isolated, and then, the schools up here isolated. And this also shows the reasoning in Buddhist psychology. The Buddha always talked about the middle path, finding the middle way to bring the common good of every party together to try to heal. Of course, the grandmother's trying to help in her family, by raising the child and stepping in for maybe her daughter who couldn't do that. But what you're saying about the way that shooting was handled in New Zealand was such a great demonstrative, effective, reasonable way of let's psychologically understand what we can do to be empowered to start to heal with this, and not to encourage like copycats and put so much attention to it. Part of the reason we get so shocked by these shootings is that it is shocking. Most people aren't doing these things, and part of the lesson maybe that the United States needs to learn from Australia is when there was a mass shooting there decades ago, immediately the response was, let's get all the weapons out of the hands and turn them in. I think, Smitha, you could comment about that, how quickly that happened. So that was another practical, tangible kind of psychological response that was meant for the greater good, using reason and wisdom to create a more peaceful society. Smitha, can you mention what happened after, or someone mentioned it in our pre-talk?
I think Dr. Lydia, would you have that piece of information? I think it took 3 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. But can you give just a little backstory for our listeners in case they don't know, what had happened?
Yeah, I think, following a similar mass shooting, I think the government there decided to pull back all the weapons.
In Australia.
Yeah. Buyback. Yeah, the similar thing that Dr. Lydia talked about New Zealand. So,
and it's not to say that all guns are bad, like there are legitimate uses for guns, but the particular one I know in New Zealand was a semi-automatic rifle that's not needed for farming. There's a lot of farming in New Zealand, farmers need guns, and I've got no problem with that. Most people have no problem with that, but a semi-automatic is not needed for any purpose, really.
No.
So that's why the buyback took place, and I believe it was successful.
Yeah, and so this is so reasonable to just keep putting this argument, like why would anyone need a semi-automatic rifle? I mean, the point that was made here in the United States was, look, this child was 18. He can't even go out and drink alcohol legally till he's 21. Why would he have access to this deadly weapon? The argument for a 21-year-old drinking age is that because young people might drink and drive, and then the car is going to be like a weapon that will kill others on the highway if someone's inebriated driving. And yet here, yes, you can buy this weapon. I mean, we have to, in this country, I'm right now in the US, we have to become, from the world, I would love to see a movement saying to the United States, please, do something about this problem, because clearly we're not effectively able to do it yet ourselves. But using these constant examples and encouraging this kind of reasonable response, it can be done. There's no reason not to do it. Anyway, I feel and see one day it will be. I really do believe very strongly in the power of love and reason and logic to be able to overcome these kinds of blocks and obstacles. And so I know that day will be coming.
Thank you so much for that, for all your thoughts. I think it was very eye-opening, some of the comparisons brought um, sorry, I lost my thought there, from all of you. So I'll move on to a tangential topic right now. And we know women tend to be very insecure about a lot of things too, about age being one of them, right? I mean, we do, and there's a common and saying that goes, never ask a woman her age, or never ask a man his salary, right? So women are very insecure about their age, and you know, does self-doubt really reduce with age? And that probably helps us make progress on our spiritual path. It's always seen that we tend to go towards spirituality somewhere around our midlife, right? Is when we are trying to question the purpose of our existence, what are we doing in life, and where do we want to go, and that kind of thing, right? So uh, does self-doubt really kind of reduce with age, and then we are more sure about what we want to go after? What do you think about that, Tripti ji?
That's a very, very interesting question, Smitha. Um, the first thing that strikes me is on this topic is this is again habituation. As a woman, you must look young, you must look pretty. You are judged by your external characteristics in some way or the other. I don't think naturally women are insecure about their age. Like instinctively, I don't think that is the case at all. I think that society tells us that we should be. You know, you're the whole Dove campaign that came about. I'm sorry, I'm in the advertising industry, so I always bring that up. Was around not objectifying the beauty of women, but talking about you're beautiful as you are in whatever format, shape, presence that you bring to the table. And I think that was when we questioned the norms and the fact that habitually women were judged by their physical attractiveness or desirability to the other sex was true. I don't think it's true anymore as more and more women are getting into careers, are being judged for their ability in areas that don't have to do anything with the stereotypical wife waiting for you to come home from work. you know they are judged on their capability, uh, which is almost equal, or should be equal to what anybody else is in that. On a very personal level, I think I always have been very, very confident about my age. I'm 57, proud 57. And I think getting older is a reality, much like death. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. But to thread in the question around, spirituality in your mid level, maybe that has more to do with your stages in life, right? Um, when you're young, you have a young family, um, maybe children, and you're trying to manage that with your work life, um, parents getting older. There's a lot going on when you're younger. Yeah. And I'm speaking from personal experience. Now, both my kids have left home more than 11 years ago. My parents, since last year, I don't even have the responsibility of looking after either the next generation in that way or the previous generation. So there is time. And when you see that and you see for myself, I see the finiteness of death. I have maybe 20 years more in life, and I'm like, I want to spend that time on something for myself, you know and that is how my spiritual journey started becoming more and more important for me at this time. I don't think it was a magical, I'm 50 now, let me start. It was more like I have less responsibility where family is concerned, career is in a safe place. Now, what else, with the finiteness of depth being certain, what else can I squeeze in, you know, in what I have? And that's the layperson. If you're like Venerable, who has learned this so early in life and managed to spend a lifetime, you know, on this journey, that's amazing.
Thank you so much, Tripti ji. I can relate to a lot of your story because we are in similar situations. Dr. Lydia, would you like to add from your experience, from your counseling practice, what has been your experience about women and their insecurities with age, or the stigmatizing of age for
Wow, this
women?
is a topic that I'm very, very interested in. So my PhD was on self-compassion and attitudes to aging and how they may be relevant to midlife women going through the menopause. Because, as I think we spoke about last time, women on average are very good at being kind to others, but not as good at self-compassion. They're not very good at being kind to themselves. And I think by about midlife, when women have given so much to their careers, to their, parents potentially, to their children. They have been, had problem solved, had multiple things on their mind, thinking about jobs, thinking about what the kids need for lunch the next day, chores around the house. Women really carry a lot in terms of managing other people's needs. And come around the time of menopause, or maybe late 40s, 50, women can sometimes get a bit burnt out from that much giving. And so my research was looking at the role of self-compassion and how that might be valuable over the midlife period. And I think often, as you were saying, Tripti, many women turn to contemplative practice at midlife because of that sort of reality that, okay, well, I've been growing these things. I've been growing a family, growing a career, and that's wonderful to grow more things in the world. But also, what would happen if I sort of use some of that energy to look inwards within myself and do something for me? And that's why we see, I think, many midlife women at meditation centers. I don't know why that's less common in men. I don't know why midlife men don't come to meditation retreats as frequently, why they don't have the same sort of shift to focus inwards that women can. I don't have a good answer for that in terms of research, in terms of my just personal view. I think, well, I don't know, but maybe because women give so much earlier in their life to other people, very good at empathy, it's like they kind of get burnt out by that. They do that so much that it's like a pendulum swing. And so women's, okay, I've given so much out there in the world. Okay, now I need to look inwards. I need to turn back towards myself. Whereas men also give a lot in the world, but not necessarily always to the same extent that women can in terms of their multitasking. So maybe they don't have such a big pendulum swing like women do when it comes to midlife. I don't know. That's just my idea that I thought of right then. But it's such an amazing topic. And I really think there's a huge amount of scope to reimagine our understanding of female aging and what it means to be a powerful woman as we age. I remember last time I was in New York going to some fancy hotel foyer, and there were all these older men, all looking very powerful. They didn't feel ashamed to be old. They were all making really important business deals. They felt very powerful. And, I think that women too can feel a wonderful sense of power with age, but we need to do more in terms of social change to reach that point. We've got a lot of work to do, and I'm really interested to see what happens in this space over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Just to jump in here, because earlier we mentioned Aryatara, and what's so interesting about Aryatara's story within the Buddhist framework is, well, why did Aryatara rise? Because she wanted to help Avalokiteshvara. She showed up as the great mother helper, and so there is a power in that image, but it's a power that's based in wisdom and compassion. It's not just only compassion. I mean, the story is that Avalokiteshvara had made a pledge many lifetimes ago, that until the samsara, the suffering realms, would be freed of all the suffering, he would continually show up as the Buddha of compassion, Bodhisattva of compassion, to be living in all the world systems available, helping beings learn how to come out of the suffering, not just through compassion, but through wisdom and compassion. And then at some point, he kind of looked around the world and said, geez, but there's still so much suffering. And then his head kind of exploded. That's why there's this kind of, multiple-headed, 11-headed Avalokiteshvara, because his head wanted to see then in every direction, okay, they all need that help. And so he's got these heads that stack up on top, and still he thought it's not enough. And then he wept, thinking, alone I won't be able to really help everyone out of the suffering. And then Aryatara, from some other realm she was at, like a mother Buddha of the universe, felt his despair, and she, as he cried, the tear spontaneously emerged from that teardrop and said, oh, don't worry, Avalokiteshvara, I'm here to help you, and I won't quit either until everyone's free. I love this story because it shows there is a sane way, not to just get to midlife and retreat and say, I've given enough and I'm burnt out now, I have compassion fatigue. If you have that, it's because you don't have the wisdom wing. In Buddhism, the wisdom wing is seeing the empty nature of the reality. And that's a very Buddhist psychological approach to the view on the nature of reality. So not everyone would have that. But the reason that His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans are still laughing and joyful and thriving actually in exile, they're not despaired, they're not downtrodden, they don't see themselves as groveling, begging refugees that were driven out of their own country. They're actually radiating out through the Dharma the beautiful expression of what happens through wisdom and compassion. And of course, both Avalokiteshvara, who's projected and seen a bit as the masculine, as well as Aryatara, who's the feminine, together with the wisdom and compassion, they're both using wisdom and compassion in complementary aspects. It doesn't matter that Avalokiteshvara is portrayed as male and Aryatara is portrayed as the female. They're both inside their own way that they're living compassion comes from the empty nature with the wisdom. And so this is a beautiful expression of the Buddhist psychology. The storylines are to help us understand the psychology, the underpinnings. We don't pray to these beings as gods or something to come and help rescue us. That's not how Buddhist psychology works. They're role models of how we ourselves, each of us, can transform, must transform. In the Buddhist text, it says, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas cannot open your mind and put their wisdom and compassion in. They can only point the way, but you yourself must go and walk the way, which is why I think it's such a beautiful example in the 21st century for this educated moment and world cultural moment, saying, look, through a very secular approach, we can use wisdom, reason, logic, and bring in the understanding through compassion to help everyone transform, because that's truly what we need. We don't need it to just be a women's leadership transformation, and we don't need it to just be the guys are the bad guys. That's not going to be beneficial for them or for anyone. That's not what compassion would say. Compassion would say, let's all do this now, because clearly the need is there, and clearly the gift that the Tibetans brought out of Tibet, and that thank you, Mother India, for welcoming them and holding them and letting the Nalanda tradition flourish again back in India, is that it's based on a very educational approach using reason and logic, showing how to create antidotes and new ways to confront destructive emotions. And it's really, at the end of the day, destructive emotions are the enemy for each of us. They rob us. They're like robbers. They take our peace of mind, and they can become really like enemies to oneself, because if we feel anger, we've turned something inward. We don't feel good. And then they can become big troublemakers, because with feeling depressed and feeling angry, we will turn that outward, and it creates and spreads like a virus of consciousness. And this is much more dangerous even than the COVID. If this violent mental attitude of anger and divisiveness spreads, it will be much more dangerous for the whole global situation. So, using this as a secular framework is such a beautiful, inspirational way that yes, Aryatara can be there. And I'm just smiling because I love that she's like, okay, yes, I want to help. To want to help, to want to do something is very positive, but it has to be in a way that's very steady, very balanced, very middle way. That's really the mind unshaken, based in the wisdom. And then that holding boundaries, just talking about aging and doubt. I don't agree at all that I feel more doubting as I get older. Yesterday was my 56th birthday, and I just said to my sister, I love it. No way do I want to return to teenage years. Those are not my good old days. She said, no, now we're going to our golden years, because she's 2 years younger. Her birthday's in another few weeks. So, we're saying, like, now you really feel you get this opportunity to learn. And if you have good, healthy relationships with a spiritual mentor, or with my sister, who's one of my best friends, to dialogue. We're very different in many ways, and sometimes we rub, but then it's like, okay, now I know I'm going to take a chance and communicate. And you need to have not that gossiping sister talking that Dr. Lydia was talking about, that nitpicky, I'm not going to say the other word, but the word you said is true, can be like that, being very cutthroaty, backstabbing. You need to have a sisterhood of kindness that's also courageous. This is what I want to talk about. Instead of doubt, we have to find that courage, that compassionate courage through our own willingness individually to be vulnerable with the ones that we can trust to be vulnerable, with our spiritual mentors, with our Dharma friends, that we say, look, I really want us not to be gossiping. The Buddha said gossiping is a fault. It's a non-virtue. It's not part of right speech. So we have to use noble silence. Noble silence help us listen deeply. And then we have to have our dignity, knowing we're not going to turn around and share someone's private information that they've just take vulnerable courage to share with everybody, whether that's with us, one person, or with a smaller group, that we're holding these sacred vessels. I mean, this is where we can use our creative energy and also our own courage of dignity to say, oh, I'm going to learn something now, and not to retreat, and not to, philosophize about it, not to use like intellect to say, oh, well, that didn't really matter. No, to really listen, to really be there, to really show up, to really be there with love. This is the most courageous thing we can ever grow into, and it needs time. It needs time of years of seasoned practice to know what works and what doesn't work. And we need to do it without any kind of fear. In that sense of selflessness, meaning for the greatest good, the pure motivation. My teacher would say over and over again, pure motivation. And that will be the most powerful psychological friend and ally and antidote to the three poisons of ignorance and greedy selfishness and aggression, anger, hatred, because that kind of certainty within oneself, that's what, is really the mind unshaken, because the mind is here in the heart. And that's the kind of sacred spiritual psychology that Buddhism can bring for a practitioner. But beyond being a practitioner, we should just also see ourselves just as a human brother, sister, or transgendered, or however. I mean, I don't know, just love each other, however we're labeling each other, that doesn't matter, but with a warm heart. But we need to learn the antidotes. And that doubt, whether it's doubt in a woman's heart or doubt in a man's heart or whatever, the doubt is just being disconnected from really the depth of knowledge of knowing one's true essence. And if one knows one's true essence, the doubt will just evaporate. Because doubt is fear. Doubt is just fear. And doubt is an insecurity and uncertainty within oneself. There's no one out there that can make us feel insecure and uncertain. That's our own mind doing that. Therefore, there's no one out there that can fix us. We could go to lifetimes of therapy. The therapist cannot fix us. So in Buddhist psychology, we learn that destructive emotions don't lead to our happiness, and that there are antidotes. There are ways to learn helpful behaviors that lead to the depth of mental sanity. We're not a Buddha yet, but definitely our minds can become much more light, much more happy, much more clean, clear, wise, skillful. And we can keep walking the path all the way to Buddhahood. In the meantime, we become an extremely positive force for the good. just even for our own good. That's good. That's okay. That's allowed in Buddhism. We have to do that. That the Buddha started with himself. He started with his own practices. And then we can become an instrument for the force for the good for anyone that we encounter. That's the recipe. That's the formula for practicing the Buddhist psychology. But you don't have to be a Buddhist to do it. You can just say destructive emotions just arise in any mind stream that doesn't understand how to handle. Destructive emotions, any emotion's not destructive. It only becomes destructive when it starts to harm oneself, when it takes over. So in other words, it's okay sometimes to feel angry. It's okay to feel angry that people are being shot and are suffering, and that, to the sense that anger then motivates us to see what is the solution. But if the anger takes over and starts to use us as a tool, using our anger to become raging and non-helpful, then there's no point. That's why the Buddha didn't say, oh yeah, go ahead and get angry and then change the world. He said, no, take that habit out of your mind stream, because underneath the anger is a very clear wisdom. And in clarity and wisdom, then you'll be able to be a very effective instrument.
Thank you so much, Venerable. Thank you for bringing that aspect. I mean, we talked a lot about compassion the first hour, and it's important to keep in mind that it is not blind compassion, but compassion with the wisdom wing. And for our audience, I would like to say that Dr. Lydia has had a very long day today, and we're really, really grateful to her for being here and giving us our time. And so thank you so much, Dr. Lydia, and we look forward to having you with us again. Any closing comments if you would like to sign off with?
Thank you, Smitha. As always, such a pleasure to be part of this ongoing conversation. And, it's given me so much to think about myself, and to even just the doubt, as Venerable was just saying, doubt is really just fear. That is something I feel that was like an aha moment for me. So I need to percolate on that a little bit more. But so many little parts to continue to think about. So a pleasure to be a part. And I'll go to bed. I've been up for nearly 24, a long, long time. So I'm going to go and enjoy a really long sleep now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lydia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good rest.
So with that, we'll take, I think there are a lot of audience questions. So I'd request Brother Chong and Brother Sharabla to, start posting them. Okay. So we had one question last time too on the Depp Heard trial. Interesting. I've learned at least 2 points from the Depp Heard trial. With women are not default victims of violence, men are also abused. And two, people with addiction, mental illness are humans and deserve dignity and compassion. Absolutely. Regardless of their gender. Absolutely. I want to know our speaker's view on these 2 points. Tripti ji, would you want to start with that?
I think, John, there's nothing to disagree on that at all. You're so right. Anybody can be a victim of violence. And when we are talking about generalizations, we are saying by and large, compassional instinct is stronger, women are less violent compared to, but there's still, the 3% that have committed those shootings in the US. So I think the generalization is on talking on trends. It's not specifically that there is no violence, from women, or women are 100% not aggressive. That's not the case. In fact, in each one of us, there is the characteristics that are more aggressive, and there are characteristics that are less aggressive. And what we are trying to do through practices, and Venerable will talk more about this, is to nurture and cultivate those practices that are less aggressive, that are mindful, that are about stopping and thinking, about using the presence of the moment, and that becoming a response mechanism a habituation for you. That is the way I have personally benefited from shamatha and vipassana in my own practice, because I have tried to remember what it feels like when I'm not attached to the response of how I react, and to pause and use my breath as a tool for that, right? It doesn't mean I have no violence in me. I am 100% sure there is violence in me, but I'm trying to nurture the non-violent part or component of myself. And I think when we are looking at these instances where people are more violent than they should be, or are expressing the violence in their character, they haven't had the opportunity to actually work on themselves. That would be my response, to that question. Venerable?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Tripti ji. That's a great response. And John, yes, I think it's very true that we have to look at this, as I was trying to point out, not through the victim and perpetrator gendered pattern, but to look at the destructive emotion pattern. And so violence in any case is never acceptable. So it's not even like a lower level of aggression. It's just not acceptable to be violent. I mean, there's no need for it. It's a learned pattern behavior. And, it's because it's learned, it means it's impermanent, and it can be something different can be learned that's better. And so in looking at it in terms of just a patterning of destructive emotions in Buddhism, we don't start at all looking at any of these topics of the male and the female or anything like that. We just look at which behaviors lead to happiness and which behaviors lead to suffering. It's just clear cut like that. So yes, I don't follow the media that much, but I did see a little bit of this, of the trial that's been going on. And I think that Johnny Depp talked about that he was raised and socialized in a home where he also experienced some kind of abuse, and that, more of this information coming out in such famous ways hopefully will open up more dialogue. That also then shows the second part of that, your question around mental health and addiction, is that, Johnny Depp's been very open about the fact that he's used lots of drugs and alcohol. And, now it's very good in some sense when people say, now I'm getting sober, I'm getting clean, because it means when you get sober and clear, you can really be emotionally mature enough to show up to handle, how to learn how to live in a new way with these emotions. It doesn't mean the patterns will be gone, but at least you can face them, and learning new ways to face them and more effective ways to face them means your own mental health is going to also change. Like many people go to the gym, and exercise with the barbells and the tool, doing all this for the body. But if we would only do this sometimes for the mind, and I'm talking about the mind here, the emotional mind, if we would only be putting in that kind of focus and attention on our heart and our wisdom and our feelings, we would grow an incredibly strong heart, incredibly powerful heart and mind. And so this also takes practice. This is what we call in Buddhism our practice. So your points are absolutely accurate, which is it's not as important to try to find this reason, blame the men and the women are the victims. No, women also have afflictive emotions. So afflictions mean anything that disturbs our mental peace of mind. And those emotions are harmful also to themselves, also to others. And, men also have afflictive emotions, harmful to themselves, harmful to others. And both are the same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. It doesn't matter what your gender identity is. Your gender identity, your sexual orientation identity, your nationality identity, your religious identity, none of these matter. What matters is, as a human being, as a living being, as a sentient being, your own happiness is the most important to oneself. And so how do we learn better how to create that happiness? Through sanity, through truth, through honesty, through healthy mental habits. And how do we cultivate and build those and grow those? And how do we remove, a little bit like mind weeds? For a long time I was an organic farmer. So how do we take out the destructive emotions that are like weeds just growing and preventing our beautiful flowering of our beautiful mind? So we know alcohol and drugs, although there could be earlier psychological problems that someone was led to trying to self-medicate, that those things also need to be used in very low moderation. Actually, the Tibetans, they have their own medical system, but they really would, His Holiness would say, actually, we would much rather train everybody through the Buddhist learning, through the education, than to have them take special Buddhist pills at the Tibetan medical doctor, because everyone who's got a functioning mind that can read, that can think, that can study is capable of learning emotional health. And yes, there will always be some cases where some beings need, Tibetan medicine or maybe Western psychological medicine because of chemical imbalances. They're maybe not able to use the mind to touch into the emotional transformation, but it's at least where the starting point should be, and anyone who's either experienced receiving violence or perpetrating violence should be honest with each of us. We've all done that. We've lost our temper. We've used our voice, raised our voice. Maybe we haven't struck someone physically, but even losing your temper and shouting at someone, or losing your temper and having a negative thought and looking at someone negatively, that's already starting to carry forth aggression. There's no need for that. There's really no need. There's a way to practice, as Tripti ji mentioned in our meditation training. Shamatha means calm, abiding practice, meaning you watch your own mind, and whatever comes up, you watch it calmly and clearly, peacefully, without judging it, without pushing it away, without encouraging it. You just become aware. And then through that training, after a long, long time, many months of sitting with a regular practice, then you can bring in the insight, trying to become a little bit more investigative. Where does that emotion stem from? Where does it come from? How does it feel? Where does it go to? And then you can start to really relearn how to just abide with it peacefully and let it release by itself without needing to do anything. And I don't mean where does it come from, like, oh, my horrible childhood, I was so, yes, some of us have had, in the US, very experience with violence in our childhood, but it's not like Western psychology. It's just awareness in the moment of, oh, this anger doesn't really feel good. It's got a temperature. Sometimes it feels hot. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, but I'm just aware of it. And then by being aware of it, actually slowly it just starts to just be understood and then released. And you haven't looked at anyone angrily. You haven't spoken angrily. You haven't judged anyone. You haven't thrown anything at anyone. So it takes time, but it's a wonderful technique to start to then change the mind. And once these changes come, these positive changes, life becomes much more clear, much more peaceful, much more content and happy. Thank you for that question. Important question, important pointing out that we don't want to pin people into roles of victims and perpetrators. Oh, I can't hear you, Smitha ji.
Sorry about that. We have a lot more audience questions coming in. So, Brother Chong, if you can get next question for Tripti ji. Ironically, Ukraine needs more and more weapons to sustain peace and defend themselves in their own homeland, and other countries are sending more weapons to Ukraine as well. So, do you think this is not a practical solution? What else can we help or suggest them to defend themselves practically and effectively? Tripti ji, if you want to take a stab at that. I understand this is veering away from probably the current today's topic, but nonetheless, I think it's an important one.
Yeah, thank you. Ahmed, I mean, I think the whole discussion around sending more arms and Putin's response of warning people, of warning countries that are sending more response, it's just a mechanism of escalation, right? Sanctions, which is a non-violent, mechanism, is a fantastic tool. But then let's send arms so you can defend yourself against more attacks. But recently, just I think this week, we had the leaders of both France and Germany, Emmanuel Macron and as well as Olaf Scholz, speaking to Mr. Putin. And I think it was a 1.5 hour long conversation where they urged him that he has to immediately go into a ceasefire withdraw the Russian troops, and start a dialogue with Ukraine. And that, I think, is the solution. The solution is whatever the issues that Putin has, and in his mind, he has very relevant reasons for why the war is there. They need to be discussed. And we need to get both parties on a non-violent platform, which is communication, to have them actually talk about what measures will take. The destruction that has been caused on both sides is so heartbreaking, on both sides. And I know so many Russian friends who are so embarrassed and ashamed of what their country is doing. But it's an anonymous country where one leader, I'm sure for whatever reasons he thinks is right, he's taken these actions. But the answer is not more violence at all. The answer is dialogue.
Thank you so much, Tripti ji. I think that summarized it well. Every time I begin writing the script for a session, I list out a bunch of questions. And the last two times, both times, I've never gone through with the complete list of questions because there is so much to talk and there is so much to learn from all of you. And, the topic calls for probably another session where we can talk take these conversations forward. I think we had some very interesting questions that we could not address today, so we could bake them into our next session and address them via the next dialogue itself. So I would like to thank, Venerable Dasel for her insights and Tripti ji as well. Thank you so much. You bring so much into this conversation, and it's very important for us laywomen as well to get that laywomen perspective in addition to all the teachings we are receiving. It's so important because. For us, I think that's an important part of the Sangha to be able to find that fellow trooper who is in a similar situation as we are. And this whole session is not intended in any way to show men are any lesser than women at all. So, for all you listeners out there, I know my husband cried the day he heard about the shooting. He could not fathom 7 to 9 year olds being shot so brutally. So, again, all the men out there listening to us, that's not the intent at all. It's about trying to see what it is, those feminine qualities that can help make this place a better world, make this world a better place, rather. So, we will have another series and address all your questions from today, all the remaining questions in the next series. So we look forward to having you again. And with that, we will wrap up with our end dedications for today. Thank you so much for all tuning in today. Thank you, Tripti ji, and thank you, Venerable Dasel. Samiksha, if you could do the end dedication.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. It was such an insightful discussion. Thank you, Venerable Tenzin Dasel, Tripti ji, and thank you, Smita ji, for that very nice moderation. So now I would like to wrap up this discussion by announcing upcoming event. Okay, so on 5th June we have Daily Dharma series, part 5, mistaken views and misconceptions about Buddhism. The moderator will be Ram Narula, and contributors are Be Mitru, Dr. Giuliano, and Vivek Sharma. Yes. Okay, so now I would like to recite these 4 great vows, and then after I would like to request all of you to say a few words, and we will end this discussion. So the 4 great vows: sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May all beings be well, happy, and safe. Venerable Tenzin Dasel, could you please say a few words to ending words of the discussion?
Well, we dedicate all. First, I want to say thank you to Smitha and the other panelists, Dr. Lydia and Tripti G, as well as to yourself, Samikta, and to Brother Chong, and to Brother Sherab behind the scenes, everyone at Sattva for helping, and for all those tuning in and listening. Thank you for your precious time and your questions. I just would ask now that we all dedicate in our heart of hearts that all these merits will multiply throughout the space and time for the happiness, highest compassion immeasurably, and joy for every single living being. So, with equanimity, that these merits may never cease until all of the suffering is finished, and that our conversations and dialogues go immediately to helping this solution come about. May we all have happiness, great health, long life, joy, and make a difference in big and small ways wherever we are, so that we ourselves benefit and become a force for the good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I just forgot to thank Dr. Brown. I would like to thank her because she was here and I just forgot it. I'm so sorry for that. So I would like to thank her. Okay, so now I would like to invite Tripti ji.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody on this panel for giving me an opportunity to think about things that I wasn't thinking about, the stimulus to think about things that weren't in my immediate frame. And thank you all who have been listening in for the questions posed that you provide for us. My dedication today is to all the teachers out there who are making this movement on our paths possible. Geshe Damdol, Dorji Damdol ji, Atishala, His Highness the Dalai Lama, Jetsun Ma, but 1,000 others whose works we have so much access to today because of various reasons that have happened. And I pray for their long, 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 long life so that we may continue to benefit and continue to walk on our paths and hopefully take that benefit and pass it to people around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tripti ji. Smita ji.
I dedicate all the merit from our practices, from our conversations gathered towards the realization of all the deeds and the prayers of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas of the three times, and to the upholding of the doctrine of scripture and insight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your precious time that you have given to us.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you, all of you. We
Thank
look forward to seeing you next month.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.